Okay, welcome everybody to our monthly call of the Movement for Community-Led Development. We're really pleased that we'll be able to tackle climate change here today at the community level. Some very exciting recent things are happening in this space. And so I'm really delighted that we'll be able to hear from Stephanie Tai, who was involved with her colleague Kiyomi in creating these new principles that we're going to hear about today. But before we do that, I just do want to welcome everyone. People are still coming in. And for those of you new to the movement, I just want to give a few slides of introduction. So I'll give a brief overview on the movement for community-led development. Then we'll hear from Stephanie. And then we'll hear from some of our colleagues around the world on how the movement is growing in their country. Then I want us to do a participatory exercise and really look at, for the next several months, what do we want to hear from? You know, there are so many exciting new things happening in this space of localization and shifting the power and decolonizing development. There's lots of people that we could be hearing from, so I want to get your opinions as to who we should hear from. And then there's a lot of also coming events that you will want to know about, either virtually or in person. So that's our agenda. And I can make, so the movement is based on this recognition that development is local, and very specifically, achieving at least a dozen of the Sustainable Development Goals requires integrated, gender-focused strategies at the community level. We see no other pathway to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. You can't achieve health without water, without halting child marriage, without nutritious food. All these things have to happen in the same communities for people's fundamental human rights to be achieved. So we launched this movement at the Sustainable Development Summit at the United Nations on the day that those agreements were signed. We now have more than 1,500 local civil society organizations in the movement. We have 74 international organizations in the movement. The Hunger Project has provided the secretariat. Anne and I and Sarah and Pascal, we have all been paid to support the movement by the Hunger Project, but that is in the process of changing, and you'll hear a bit more of that later. We're emerging as an independent network of networks. So we have 5 goals in the movement. The first is voice and agency for women, youth, people with disabilities. All marginalized groups must have a voice in the decisions that affect their lives. That's a fundamental human right. The second goal is a tougher one. Well, they're all tough, but getting 20% of national budgets down to the community level. In the rich world, that's always the case. Local communities have a fair share of the public budget, but that's not true in low and middle income countries, and it needs to become so. And more countries are moving in that direction of devolving budgets. Our third goal is that there be democratic, participatory, local governance so that people's voices are heard and that local governments are responsive. Those 3 things should come together to ensure another part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everyone has equal access to quality public services. And then finally, and this is something that we're going to hear a lot about today, it's communities are the agents of resilience. There's really no such thing as a resilient country or resilient households. It's always community leaders who are the first responders to any shock. And as a movement, we're committed to strengthening their capacities and resources and information so that communities can succeed in adapting to climate change and adapting to responding to other shocks that are increasingly coming their way and hurting the livelihoods, health, and lives of people that we care about. So a lot of what we do is, one of the activities we do is really strengthening the practice of community-led development. We have these participatory tools. This is the new, fresh, new Amharic version of our participatory community-led development assessment tool that communities are using around the world. We have unlearning labs. We just had one yesterday on community-led evaluation. So both at the national level, at the global level, and then at the subnational level, the movement is doing what our members ask for. And that's how it works. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce our guest speaker today, Stephanie Tai of the World Resources Institute. I've been a WRI fan for many, many, many years. They have published some of the most interesting materials that are of existential importance to our future as human beings on this planet. Without further ado, let me pass it to you, Stephanie. Welcome.
Thanks, John, and thank you everyone for joining this call today. If people prefer to listen in French, I believe there's also interpretation in French. You should click on the icon at the bottom. So I will just briefly share my screen to begin the presentation. There we go. So thanks again. And my name is Stephanie Tai. As John mentioned, I am a researcher at the World Resources Institute. I sit within the climate resilience practice at WRI. And I'm very happy today to talk about locally led adaptation and the associated principles. First, to provide some context, why are we even talking about this today? It's because a large portion of climate finance, especially coming from international donors, international level, is not reaching the front lines. So we know that local communities are really at the forefront of climate impacts. They're feeling the impacts of climate change, and they don't always have the agency and the decision making to take ownership and to manage their adaptation priorities. And this is happening all over the world. In fact, less than 1% of the $187 billion of total official development assistance is going directly to local development actors. And a recent WRI paper that I helped to lead showed that even of these community-based and community-centered projects and interventions, most of them are not really featuring elements of what we consider locally led adaptation. So they have some minor elements, but they're really not in line with what we consider to be locally led adaptation. So this means that a lot of international climate finance is still flowing very indirectly to local communities, and that application processes and reporting requirements are still very complex, leading to a lot of power disparities for local partners. So now that we have this context within the framing of international climate finance and the other things I mentioned, what do we mean by locally led adaptation? This is an approach that has actually already been in existence for many decades. Communities themselves are already kind of taking ownership of their adaptation priorities and what needs to be done in their communities. So it's not something new to them on its own, but it is something that is relatively newer to, for example, international funders. And that in this approach, a local agency and decision making is given over to local actors in a more meaningful way. So we're recognizing the value of local knowledge and local expertise to address the climate risks. We're ensuring that local actors who are feeling the impacts of climate change have access to the power, the resources to build climate resilience. And we're making a shift from just local communities participating in these processes to actually being very meaningful. And this graphic here provides a good way of showing what we mean by this shift from traditional community consultation to a more locally led adaptation approach. So for example, traditionally community members might have been invited to a workshop about a project to learn about what is going to be implemented in their community or their region, and to provide some minor inputs into how this is going to take place. But in what we're referring to as locally led adaptation, actually helping to meaningfully decide what is being implemented, how this is happening, and by whom. So they have much more ownership and control and agency over decisions and resources. And at the heart of locally led adaptation is just the concept of people. So we know that it's important to put people at the center. This has a lot of equity benefits. And I like these two visuals here because they really showcase the differences between just increased total benefits and equity, quality, like these concepts of what they actually might mean in practice and how they might sometimes have unintended consequences. So for example, on the left side, we see that when a program, for example, is talking about increased total benefits to a region, this does not necessarily mean that everyone is benefiting. So it could be that some groups are benefiting more than others. So it may not mean that there is this concept of equity in place. And then this other graphic with the bicycles on the right show that even when everyone is receiving kind of equal compensation, it may not mean that everyone is kind of benefiting in an equitable way from this equal compensation. So equality does not equal like equity, equal compensation does not mean equitable outcomes are going to be an immediate result. So for these reasons, we see a lot of benefits to locally led adaptation. It can be a more effective way of kind of utilizing scarce resources because these resources are much more highly localized. They're based on like local priorities, local inputs. So they're going to be ideally much more kind of locally relevant and aligned with local realities. This means that efforts can be more efficient. There can just be better use overall of resources and people's time and money. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, it can lead to a more equitable distribution of power and resources, which is, of course, just really good for a long-term positive transformation in communities. We're seeing a growing political momentum on locally led adaptation. So here are a few examples. For example, there have been 16 national governments that have endorsed the locally led adaptation or LLA principles that were developed as a result of this ongoing work on LLA. The draft cover text in the last COP27 also referenced LLA, and it's also just being just included more and more in different conversations and kind of national and other documents. So all this work on locally led adaptation did result in the development of the principles for locally led adaptation. They were a result of a lot of background research and analysis, bilateral consultations with local actors, and also with the over 100 partners who form part of the locally led adaptation community of practice. So all of these inputs serve to create the 8 principles that you see here on the screen, which we call the LLA principles. I can just read through them really quickly, and then in the next slides, we'll go into them in a bit more detail. The first one is devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. So for example, this can be anything from the village level to local government level. It really depends on the local context, what we mean by appropriate level. Number 2, providing patient and predictable funding that can be accessed more easily. So this signifies a shift from traditional, very short-term, like 1 to 2 year projects to longer projects that can really result in kind of longer term positive change for communities and building their local resilience, especially to climate change. Number 3, investing in local capabilities to leave an institutional legacy, which is of course linked to 1 and 2. Number 4, addressing structural inequalities faced by marginalized groups, including women, youth, children, and disabled people and other groups who are marginalized. 5, building a robust understanding of climate risk and uncertainty so that local actors can also be fully engaged in kind of identifying and prioritizing different adaptation priorities for their communities. Number 6, flexible programming and learning, because communities themselves are in flux, and so are kind of social changes and also even climate risks, because these may change over time as climate change impacts intensify and just evolve. 7, ensuring transparency and accountability. And 8, collaborative action and investment. So up to today, over 110 organizations across the world have actually endorsed the principles for locally led adaptation. Here are the logos of some of these organizations. And here's the second slide with more of these partners and endorsers of the principles. You can see there's everything from local organizations to research institutes, governments, development agencies, so even private sector. So there is broad interest in an LLA and the principles. Here are some examples of where LLA is already happening in many countries across the world. And I'll be going into detail into some of these in a moment. So now that we know about what LLA is, why it's important, and the principles that have been developed by partners, including WRI, to kind of bring them to life, what do they actually look like in practice? And for these examples, I'll be drawing from 2 relevant WRI publications, which you see here on the screen. So the first one is by my colleague Tamara Kojer and other colleagues. It's called Locally Led Adaptation from Principles of Practice. And the other one is a more recent paper that actually just came out a few days ago called Strengthening Gender Equity and Locally Led Adaptation Processes in Africa. So the first one has a global focus and the second one an Africa focus. In case of interest, I thought it would also be relevant to share a few of the key findings from each of these papers. So for the first one, the authors found that locally led action can really help address historical imbalances of power and the disproportionate vulnerabilities that climate change will otherwise deepen. They found that there are many ways that adaptation finance can reach local actors to ensure that local actors have the agency that they need, that this depends on the context and the type of organization that exists in that area, and that there are also many opportunities already for funders and governments to adapt and scale LLA approaches. So the tools and resources exist. And they also go through every single principle. So this paper has that very interesting aspect that it walks the reader through every single principle of LLA and provides very relevant examples of how this principle looks kind of on the ground. And it uses a range of sectors and contexts for that. The second paper is a literature review of gender relevant projects and programs. And it's assessing for just very strong gender responsiveness and how this can complement and really work with LLA to just mutually strengthen both gender and adaptation goals. So a key result of this paper is that even though we looked at many gender relevant efforts, only very few of them were actually on what the gender field refers to as gender responsive or gender transformative efforts, because they were still very, even though they had this gender aspect, they were still not as strong as they could have been with regards to their gender components. But we did see some cases in which women were very kind of effectively engaged and meaningfully involved in projects that also had a locally led adaptation approach. So we did kind of illustrate these kind of the strong complementarities between the two approaches in 3 specific cases to really show how just gender and locally led adaptation can be mutually beneficial by working together. This is just a brief snapshot of the 3 kind of strong cases that I just mentioned. The fishing communities in Senegal who benefited from the End the Graph Sahel project, the kind of women-led cooperatives in South Africa through the Gender CC project, and the agroecological systems in Zambia that benefited from and are still benefiting from the green living movement. And as you can see, an important kind of or a notable aspect about these projects is that they are some of them, they are very, they're considered like more long-term projects. So they're not 1 or 2 year projects, but they have a duration of just 6 or more years. So this is a key result that we found as well, that the longer the project, at times the more of an opportunity there is for long-term like positive changes for building climate resilience within communities. So principle number 1, devolving decision-making to the lowest appropriate level. I like to share this example of the Yakum emergency unit in Indonesia. So this unit uses funds from the Huayru Commission to enable the active involvement of women's groups in the village development planning processes. So they use this funding to organize women's groups, and they enable them to map the different climate risks and climate vulnerabilities that they face to demonstrate solutions. And then they actually adapt some of these solutions in the villages. So this is a way for just local community members, in this case, like these women's groups, to have a direct say in adaptation decisions in their communities, instead of the decision coming from, let's say, an international like funding committee who sits in a European office or somewhere that is very, very far away. So principle number 2, addressing structural inequalities faced by marginalized groups. Here, I can share this example of the SURF fund in Antigua and Barbuda, in which loans for upgrading infrastructure to address flooding and other small-scale adaptation solutions were explicitly targeting individuals who face traditional barriers to accessing climate finance. So for example, informal workers, small businesses who generally don't have access to finance because they're viewed as high risk by banks and cooperatives. So this fund explicitly targeted and benefited them. And this is a way that they help to address some of the inequalities that these marginalized groups face. Principle number 3, providing a pathway for funding to be just accessed more easily and more patiently. There's an example from the Micronesia Conservation Trust, which provides very continuous and sustained finance to local partners in Micronesia. So they allow like existing local community like award winners to apply for additional funding before the funding has run out. So they allow them to continue their work and their projects for years and years, which has led to kind of positive long-term outcomes. Here we see an example that blends more than one principle, and that's something that the other examples can do as well. But this one specifically is a really good example of principle 4, investing in local capabilities, and principle 5, building a robust understanding of climate risk. So this example is in South America, the Gran Chaco Pro Adapt project, which took advantage of an existing very robust and strong kind of local system of regional like networks and alliances to establish an early flood warning system from the region. So this is a very dry region in South America that nevertheless still faces like extreme floods during certain parts of the year. So this project, they engaged in an intensive program of map reading skills and monitoring tools across different communities in the region. And they also engaged in peer-to-peer training, and they leveraged user-friendly, accessible, like mobile tools to improve communication across what was once a very kind of isolated region of just dispersed communities. So now all these communities can very cohesively and efficiently like communicate with each other about flood risks and other risks to the communities. And this has really improved their resilience because, for example, you can see in the picture, there's this community member that is just taking a photograph of the river, and that she can share that with an expert in hydrology or kind of early flood warning systems who's received training through ProAdapt or other means. And then they can kind of translate that and communicate what it means to other communities. So if there's going to be an imminent risk of a flood, then they can just make that message go out very, very widely and efficiently to all the communities that might be affected so they can prepare for the flood events. Principle number 6, flexible programming and learning. There is this example of the Green Living movement in Zambia. So specifically for one area, they noted that for a project, some sections of the communities, specifically women, were not participating as much as others. So they actually consulted with the women and asked them how they could do better. The women said that the activities that had been proposed were actually too tedious and time consuming. And so women themselves, they proposed new activities that the project staff then accepted and implemented into the program. And this allowed the women to actually participate in the program and showed that the project staff was willing to really accommodate the specific needs of women so they could benefit from the adaptation project. And now the last principle, principle 8, collaborative action and involvement. We have an example from Senegal. So in this case, the project staff and the Graph Sahel created various targeted spaces and platforms to promote women's leadership. They worked with women to really train them in leadership and open up spaces for them, for example, to engage in the electoral process in their communities and local government. And they actually got a lot of women elected to these local government positions. And they, in addition to that, also engaged in trainings with men to better understand how domestic chores and labor burdens were being distributed. And this led to a better understanding of how to just share chores in just a more gender equal manner within households. And the follow-up survey showed that these trainings actually did have a measurable shift in how gender roles were distributed, especially among younger couples. So to conclude, there is a clear understanding of the benefits of locally led adaptation and also linking it to other fields, other sectors such as gender, as I shared with these last few examples. There's a lot of potential here. There's a growing political will for LLA, and there's also a growing evidence base of examples from across the world on how to put the LLA approach and principles into practice. So there's clarity on what we need to take this to scale. And just to wrap up my presentation, I'd also welcome everyone who is here today. If your organization is interested in endorsing the LLA principles, or if you would like to learn more about them and how they might be relevant for your organization, it's actually very easy. It's a very straightforward process to endorse the principles. You can just let me know by contacting me at the email address on the screen, stephanie.tai@wri.org. And you can fill out a simple form that I will then share with you and send us your logo, and then we can upload your logo to the LLA Principles webpage. And just a note that it's at wri.org, not .com, for the email address. So thank you all for your attention today. I will stop sharing my slides and my screen.
Thank you, Stephanie. This is really terrific. I'm sure you're going to get a flood of endorsements on this, because it is certainly one of our high priorities in the movement for community-led development. I did have a couple of initial questions that I'm sure a lot of folks on the call have questions. One question is for are there networks, support networks? Are there communities of practice within LLA so that, say, groups in India or Benin who want to launch an LLA project or get connected to climate funding, that they have somebody to talk to? What would you suggest would be the kind of networking or communication that groups should take up if they want to get involved?
Thanks, John. That's a great question. And I did mention very briefly, but maybe I can expand on it now, that there is an LLA community of practice. And we do welcome new members at any time to join. And there are just regular calls throughout the year for this community of practice to share key insights, fundraising opportunities, events, and lessons learned, etc., with other organizations or peer organizations and who are interested in advancing LLA.
Wonderful. So if anyone has a question, you can use the raise hand option and raise your hand, and we'd like to hear from you. So Evans, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Actually, I've heard your name because for so many years, I've been working on the extractive industry, and WRI has been a great ally for us in Tanzania. If you know Sakura Saunders in Australia, is one of, not Sakura Saunders, but actually Natalie Lowry in Australia has been really a good ally to us in Tanzania, and she's the one who actually first introduced me to WRI. Now, the presentation that you've made is really great. And I see that there is a lot of actionable principles that have been listed on this proposal. And we would like actually to be part of endorsing it because it sounds really good. Now, I just needed to find out from you, these kinds of interventions requires a lot of capacity building in some areas. I believe that you've gathered that because you need to mobilize them, you need to build capacities in terms of awareness. Do you have any possible resource mobilization suggestions? I work for Africa Transcribe, which I've actually started. It's more of a social enterprise. We are taking up more of a business approach where we want, local communities to feel like they're on the processes. We are just an upcoming kind of a social enterprise. So I think that I talked with Anne at a certain point about this. But we're doing a lot of work with women in the mining areas in particular. And I really, really would love to hear from you or members who are participating in this call on some possible, implementable resource mobilization strategies that perhaps you saw in your experience doing this research in Zambia, in other, global South context. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Evan. And well, first, I would be remiss not to mention my colleague Kiyomi De Souza, who is also online and has been just such an integral part of just the LLA just initiative and momentum and leading the community practice as well. But you're exactly right that capacity building is key, and that is something that international donors don't always perhaps prioritize because it may not be as glamorous or as visible as other aspects of our proposal. But that is something that we continue to emphasize, for example, in our publications on LLA, that capacity building needs to be part of the picture because it is what investing in capacity building is what is going to kind of help these measures and interventions and all these efforts continue even after the project has ended. So investing in the local institutions and local organizations and local, so the local capacities, it's what is going to allow these efforts to endure and just overcome the test of time. And for the specific examples you mentioned, I don't have anything that is specific to that case that you mentioned, but I do welcome you to take a look at our publications. I think Kiyomi and myself as well, I can link some of them in the chat, and just joining the community of practice could be helpful as well. I don't know if Kiyomi have something to add. If not, then we can move on to the next question.
I think that from what I've seen, there needs to be like a blended approach in finance. So like we want communities to be, resilient and autonomous in their funding mechanisms. But from what I understand, talking to grassroots organizations, it helps to have some type of support externally, whether it be national budget allocations or international development assistance to kind of get the work off the ground, to get, to build capacity, as Stephanie was saying. And then after you build the capacity, you can set up different funding mechanisms within the community. So like community-based funding, and where, different stakeholders within more local levels are contributing to a fund that can then continuously feed into the funding of the adaptation projects. So from what I understand, it's a blended approach that is the most sustainable.
No, that's great, Kiyomi. Tarimo Albert, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, John, and great appreciation to Stephanie. That was a very insightful and a very power-packed presentation. I pray you share it on our email addresses. But I would like to re-echo the fact that during our regional knowledge sharing meeting in Naivasha, we had a lot of sharing about rooting for local resources and knowledge, and you brought it out clearly in your presentation. So I would like to know more about because communities here, where I am in Uganda, in the southwestern part of Uganda, is one of the areas that are severely affected by climate change. When it rains heavily, people lose their lives, they lose their properties. You heard what happened in Kasese when the River Nyamamba burst its banks, people lost lives, others lost their properties. You know, these climate change issues are real. And we ought to root local-led development and resources to communities to understand that there is something they have that can be improved. So how do you think we would clearly bring it to their attention so that they quickly understand the urgency of what we are doing? Because it's one thing to come and have discussions about these great ideas, and then it's another thing to have an impact created right at the grassroots level, especially like where we are best, because my community is called, my organization is called Local Sustainable Communities Organization, and which means rooting for local knowledge and resources is essential, even in human rights approach, even in climate change, even in education, even in health. So I would suggest that if we would have, like my brother from Tanzania asked, have resources so that we root this knowledge to communities where, and we have unreachable areas, by the way, in our communities. It's hard to believe. It's in our communities, and yet they are inaccessible. And that is where most impact is created. So I would like to know how you would like advise how we would integrate what we are talking about here into the local communities, using their own resources, using their own knowledge, and make it more advanced and more sustainable. Thank you so much.
Thanks for these insights and that question, Taramwa. So there are, I guess, a variety of strategies. One that comes to mind is just to, if possible, connect with other local communities as well. And even if there's a way of building just informal or formal alliances with other local communities, just to kind of increase the collective bargaining power that one single community might not be able to have on its own. That's something that, as I shared with the South America example, those communities were all very, very small, very isolated, very physically apart from each other, but they have now come together and formed this very, very strong kind of regional alliance that has given them like so much agency and autonomy to advocate and bargain for their priorities. They've even crossed borders. So the Chaco region is actually a region that encompasses territory in Argentina, Bolivia, and Paraguay. So they've now even formalized this alliance. And now instead of them having to seek out opportunities on fundraising, funders are going to them and they're asking them what they can, what they can propose. And they're able to really just, I think, take agency and have the decision-making power in the process. So that is one way, just forming kind of these alliances and just increasing the collective bargaining power that one community on its own may not have. Of course, also partnering with other local organizations or even national entities or international organizations like WRI that would be helpful as well. Just not just for this kind of bargaining power, but also just to share resources and knowledge. So an incomplete answer, but hopefully still helpful answer to kind of the very complex question that you raised.
Oh, you just nailed it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, a big priority for the movement. So I know a number of our national associations, Pascal can tell us about meeting with the relevant ministries there in Benin, and I think as a collective in each country, this is going to be a priority, and we'll be looking for additional resources and additional information, and to participate any way we can, because this is one of our 5 top priorities and of existential importance to the lives of all the people that we stand with. I don't see any other hands up. I do want to remind everyone that this has been recorded, and the slides, Stephanie's slides, as well as the recording of her presentation, will be on the website, and it will be sent out to everyone. Now we're getting some echo, so if you could please mute, that would be great. Okay, so then I'm about to go to the next topic, but I really want to thank you, Stephanie and Kiyomi, for being with us today and for having such a clear, actionable framework. And I hope that we can find ways to partner with you and with all those endorsers going forward. Oh, wait a minute, Sierra Leone's got his hand up. Aya.
Yes, thank you very much. Before going, John, we asked a question about how people like us, if we want to join the WRI, what do we need to do? What kind of criteria do we need to meet before joining it? I'm not talking about the endorsement, but we actually want to be part of the WRI, just like the MCLD movement. The endorsements can come in later anyways. I know I've seen where we can fill a form for us to be able to be accepted, or our logo can be uploaded into the WRI website, this kind of thing. Thank you very much.
I think Stephanie actually, and I'll send that information out to everyone about how to write to her and what to include to be part of it. And then also, Stephanie, the actual community of practice, is there a link on the website, or do people just communicate with you if they want to actually be an active member of the community of practice?
They can just write me or Kiyomi directly.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll get
this
to you, and I ask for forgiveness now because we will be flooding your inboxes, I think, with members.
It's for a good cause.
Yes. Okay, everybody. So thank you for this, and thanks again, Stephanie and Kiyomi and all those at WRI for this leading the charge on this super critically important topic. I'm going to put up some slides now for our final half hour of discussion. And Stephanie and Kiyomi are definitely welcome to stay if you want to participate any way you can. In fact, I would love for WRI, frankly, to join the movement for community-led development. You can join us as we join you. That would be handy. I just don't know who to write to on that subject. Okay, I'm going to throw up my slides now. Tick, tick, tick. Okay, as many of you know, this year is a year of transformation of the movement itself. We are establishing ourselves not in a hub and spoke traditional neo-colonial model, but as a true network of networks. Our national associations are getting themselves independently registered. We have gotten MCLD independently registered in the US, and it's taking this new form. And I want to be able to hear from I'll put some of our coordinators on the spot on certain key things. But part of what I want us to co-create right now is I want to know like who will be our next Stephanie. So in July, in August, on what topics would you really like to hear about new initiatives on? So here are the SDGs. If you could put in the chat and like what topic or what issue or what SDG would you like to hear about in July and August and September and October? So we've had a great series of really wonderful special guest speakers on our monthly calls. We want to continue that, but I want to make sure that it's, I had 100% confidence today that this was something that you would be interested in. But what would you like to hear about next? So please just take a moment and just write into the chat what topic you'd like to hear of, or you could just say, you know, I'd like to hear more about SDG 14 or SDG 16 or whatever topics you want to hear about. So I'm just going to pause for a minute while you write into the chat, and then we'll download and analyze all those chats and share with you what you want to hear about. Okay, and then while you're doing that, I do want us to have a chance to hear some of the progress that the national associations have made in the past month. There's been a lot. Don't know, I'm pretty sure all of our coordinators are here. Pascal, what's I know your focus has been very much in the space of locally led adaptation recently. What can you tell us about progress on that front in Benin?
Yes, thank you, John. Hi, everyone. In the movement here, the Benin chapter has targeted the locally led adaptation related to climate change for 3 reasons. First, it is related to agriculture, it is related to nutrition, and it's overall related to resilience. For that purpose, we have approached the Ministry of Agriculture to share about what the MCLD is about and how we could develop partnership in tackling climate change issue. The discussion went well, and our primary idea is really to establish a protocol. We didn't know really about what is there before, but we come to, from our discussion, that there is a mechanism at the national level, and document has been developed and made available for the national level with the approval of the climate change office. And we could take this into account to develop projects. And we have been advised to form a consortium of civil society organization with a very specific topic, we have already specified this, that will be related to the trees that could really produce fruit, vegetable, and for long term. That is a broad idea. And we could have support from a team devoted to that from the Ministry of Agriculture to support the development of the proposal, not the entire proposal, but at least the concept notes. And we learned that if the concept notes is really well designed and compiling to what could be supporting the community, there's resilience. We could have support from the climate change funds to implement, to develop the entire project, and probably to get funds allocated for that. We are very excited about that initiative, but about the support available for that. And that is one thing we are really focusing on. The second thing, as John mentioned, is the registration. As we are in the transitioning period, we are really focusing on the registration. It's going on well. And related to the registration, how do we make sure that we raise awareness about the MCLD, not only tells the civil society organization, but also including more universities and the ministries as well. Because we find that, as we all know, resilience comes from there as well. When we consider the community, we need from our theory of change as well to make sure that the two levels come together and we could make it.
Excellent.
Talking about resilience.
Yeah.
Few things I could just share, but we have more. Thank you, John.
Great, thanks, Pascal. And Joanna, I know you've been making a big headway. We heard from you earlier on raising the profile and the accountability standards so that you're being in a great position in Uganda to steward funding. Do you want to update everybody on that process?
Yes, thank you, John. I send my greetings to everyone. In Uganda, we have been progressing quite steadily, and we have developed our compliance systems. But if I move to the locally led adaptation area where we have been talking about, in Uganda, we have had a focus on nutrition, where we are engaging communities to have a direct participation as the front leads. We are working with women groups, with groups of people with disabilities, and we are requesting them to give us information on how they would like us to approach the nutrition areas that they are finding difficulty in, the gaps. And we are seeking ideas on how they would like us to progress, how they would like us to contribute. And we are collecting this information, and we will be keeping it in our archives, we will be using it, and we will be sharing it with people out there so that they can also understand the relevancy of letting people being part of the development decision-making. That is where we are when we come to locally led adaptations. Otherwise, we are quite progressing, and a lot more will be coming in on board. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Joanna. And we have new associations that are emerging, and some of the champions for that process are on the call. Juliet Lyon, do you want to say anything about Mozambique? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
Hello, Dr. John, are you talking to me?
No, I'm happy to talk to you. Do you want to give us an update on progress in Liberia?
Okay, I just want to briefly highlight on the situation of things in Liberia. especially the MCLD, what is going on. The US aid have also profile as one of their directorate partnership in Liberia. This is one of the things we have received that message from them. And if anyone should go to the US directorate partnership and log into MCLD Liberian chapter, you will see us as one of the directorate partnership or US aid worldwide. Secondly, we have been privileged to have a smallholder, female smallholders event on the 17th of this month. On the challenges the smallholders farmers are facing, especially the marginalized group. And we are looking forward to empower them as we are expecting for the next phase of event to host 50 female smallholders farmers in agriculture for that event, which we are still looking forward for resources and finance to carry on that program. You know, the MCLD, there's a lot of potential in Nigeria if the movement should be able to have what it takes to create more awareness for people to be sustainable and self-reliant in our community, which are part of our goal and our motive to raise people up from poverty.
Right.
So we have been doing great, and not only that, we have been able to renew our article for 2023-2024. Despite that, we have not get any grant to run the movement, but we are trying our best to move the motion forward as we are looking forward for funders to execute our project and move forward to become sustainable in our institution and also our community. So I would like to, so far, that is one of the achievements we have achieved in this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Jude. And I saw that Julia from Mozambique had to leave the call, so we won't hear an update from there. Aya, would you like to give us an update on Sierra Leone?
Thank you very much, John. Sierra Leone currently, we are still in progress with the election. Obviously, we have completed sensitization and some of the areas that our members talk about, election violence.
Right.
They were very, very successful, and those areas, they are calm and peaceful at the moment.
Wonderful.
And yes, we targeted 54 communities across the country, and we made some over 34 radio programs across the country also on election violence. Yes, and that was great. And also we are, yes, thank you very much. Yes, we did some community engagement. About 36 community engagements was done across the country. So currently what we are about to do, we are about to engage organizations that have already subscribed to the MCLD movement globally, and they are working there in Sierra Leone. So what we want to do is for us to engage them so that they can join force we can join force together for us to have for us to commit them on this MCLD programming. So we have contacted World Vision. World Vision is one of our members. Now, Restless Development has started attending our meetings, and also Mopanda. So many organizations, they are coming in. Yes.
That's great. Congratulations, Aya. And I see your colleague Lassie has a hand up. Lassie, did you want to add something?
Yes. I hope Lassie would like to add something.
Good.
Yeah, I think I had just mentioned what I actually wanted to say. Though, yeah, just to let you know, currently the movement of community development in Sierra Leone is actually growing. We have over 12 partners now, as he mentioned. And to be very honest with you guys, the education, the peace education that we actually roll out across the country actually helped a lot, more especially for young people and women to actually refrain from all forms of violence and being participating in the election peacefully. All the communities we engage and the media stations, the communities are very peaceful, and we are still continuing to see how we can continue to engage them even after the election. And this is what we want to maintain, to see that the peace is sustainable in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Lassie, and congratulations. I just, you know, there's so many elections going on in Africa this year, and to have your communities peaceful throughout this election period is a real gift and a miracle. So thank you for that. Okay, I want to jump ahead to some upcoming events. So here's some holidays coming up in the month of July. Malala Day. We all know Malala. Some of us actually have been able to meet her at the UN. But Malala Day is July 12th. You may want to use that as an excuse to educate your friends and colleagues about the importance of higher education for girls and young women. Also, Nelson Mandela Day is coming up in July on the 18th, another time to celebrate the kind of reconciling leadership that brings people together, that's consistent with the transformative leadership that we stand for. In our work, many of your countries are participating in the United Nations high-level political forum that's happening very soon, in just 2 weeks. I will be there. I'm sure there are people from your governments and possibly your member organizations who will be in New York for these events. If you know of that, let me know, and I will make sure to bring your greetings to them and tell them how wonderful your work is in their country. I know I'm attending a meeting by Kenya on decentralization, on localization that Kenya is having. I know there are dozens of side events, and I can send you a link to all the side events. Some of them are virtual, and you'd be able to watch them on UN TV. Then the very next week is the Women Deliver 2023 conference. Many of you met Becky, our MCLD youth ambassador from Burundi. She will be representing MCLD there. She's not able to be on today's call because she has another job, but she will be there. She will be telling people about MCLD. We will have materials at a booth there that the Hunger Project is hosting. But if you organization, or if you personally or anyone from your organization are going to be at Women Deliver in Kigali, please let me know so that I can let Becky know and that you all can meet up there, because there will be thousands of people there. So if we know ahead who to meet and how to link up, that would be very, very, very empowering. Let's see. So I think that's really, I'm going to stop sharing now. That is really everything I wanted to share. We've had a lot of events recently. I know some of you are probably on the Unlearning Labs yesterday. Anyone, Sarah or Anne, I think, has had to leave for a presentation she's giving with the Congressional Hunger Center here. But Gunjan, do you want to update people on the Unlearning Lab? How did it go?
Sure. So we had the second session of the Unlearning Labs yesterday. I know many of you were present there. Pascal supported us with last-minute translation because we had some technical difficulties. So we improvised there to ensure inclusion. And it was really about how do we move from traditional monitoring, evaluation, and learning to community-led monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I thought it was a very rich discussion. We will be sharing out not just the recording and the notes from that call, but what we will also be doing is that we created a worksheet that we are working on together on how do we change each step of the monitoring, evaluation, and learning process to become more community-led. So that's going to be open as part of this co-creation process. And then the next step in the series would be delving into each one of these specific stages. And that's going to happen next month, the next call. We will announce the date shortly of the call. The other thing I do want to share that's happening is that, John, I don't know if you talked about the USAID progress, localization progress report and the event.
No, we did not.
Okay, so in January this year, we had organized a consultation with the USAID team and with community-based and local organizations on what would be some of the practices that USAID needs to change in order to be able to put communities in the driver's seat. So one of the commitments that USAID made in 2021 was that 50% of their programming would put communities in the driver's seat in implementation, design, or evaluation. And they were looking for, they had created a list of best practices that would enable them to do so. And typically, as you all know, these decisions are taken inside the organization or in DC. For the first time, there is a policy and an indicator, the locally led development program indicator that has been created, which has more input from local community-based organizations than it actually has from international organizations. So we had organized that in January. Over 170 members from MCLD participated in that and gave their inputs. A lot of disability rights groups gave their inputs. That's when we started ASL interpretation on our calls. The report is now out, and USAID is going to come back as per their promise to us. They're going to come back to us next month to share what inputs did they hear from the MCLD members, what were they able to incorporate, what were they not able to incorporate, and why. So it's going to be closing of the feedback loop, but also to consult with MCLD members on what should they be doing next going forward. Tentatively, it's the 27th of July. We are awaiting confirmation and will send out information. But I just wanted to share this, that this is a big win for all of us in the movement, that for the first time, we have a policy that has more local input, more CBO input than international organizations input only, which is the case normally. So congratulations.
Yay, thanks, Gunjan. So, our colleague Steve wasn't able to make it, but I see Carolyn Moringa here, who's been participating in the School for Community-Led Development and the MCLD, or is she still here? Or did she leave? Okay, no, she left. Okay, it looks like people are leaving. So it probably means it's time to finish the call. As I mentioned, you'll get an email with links to the recording, to the slides, to information on how to contact Stephanie Tai. And we will look forward to participating with you in the month ahead. So thank you all for joining. And if you want to unmute and say goodbye to everybody, this is your chance. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Bye. Thanks, John.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Hello.
Bye-bye.
Hi.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Hey,
Bye.
Thank you
Pascal.
so much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tu pensais que je n'allais pas te trouver?
C'est un Pascal. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Bye.
Paul, for
How do it?
translating.
Non, je ne te laisserai jamais
Merci,
Yes,
partir.
Paul.
Rester
Bye-bye.
ensemble
And
pour toujours.
Thank you, Paul.
Merci, Paul. Merci beaucoup.
Merci
Bye,
beaucoup.
everyone.
Bye.